the main thrust of the story is these two guys from opposite sides of the war kind of getting stuck together and forming an unlikely friendship across their communication barrier.
It's not that easy. George Rowe, yeah. Thank you so much for being here with us today. George was the senior producer of the wonderful game 1111 Memories Retold. And we have some questions for him today. So first of all, George, thanks for being here. How are you doing? And what is the current game that you are playing right now?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. As I said a little bit earlier, that yeah, it was really great to go back and think about 1111 again, which is obviously a title that we shipped quite a few years ago. So it was really nice to go back through. And I saw the video that you guys made on it, which was really cool. Thank you for that. I shared it with some of the team internally. We're really happy to see you guys talking about it and, you know, really understanding it as well, which was really, really nice to see. Currently I am playing, and I'm a little behind the times here. I'm playing Control, the sort of third person, what would you call it, like X-Files Jedi simulator kind of thing. But I'm
Good
just
one.
yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful game, and really the sort of the story is fine. It's quite interesting, but the architecture and the sort of sense of the kind of, I don't know, X-Files-y mixed with 1960s, 1970s Americana buildings and everything. It's just a really stylistically beautiful game. So I'm about halfway through that at the moment. I'm really enjoying that.
Very good. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing. I also played it through, and I agree. It's a wonderful game from a lot of different perspectives. But I think this is quite clearly an entertainment game. We are also, you know, in the setting of discussing serious games. And I would be super interested in learning, like, how would you define a serious game, and how is it different from an entertainment game?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think I was thinking about this, and I mean the sort of the easy answer, you know, the more easy answer, I guess, is that a serious game is in some way generally has some kind of educational message or some other way of dealing, you know, grasping and dealing with a more serious or more educational topic, whereby people can interact with it in a slightly more interesting and slightly more perhaps gripping way than another way you might think about this topic. But then I was thinking about some other games I'd played, which, you know, it's quite a blurry subject, because some games which you would maybe think of as quite entertainmently, they still get you to think about things in ways you wouldn't normally, you know, have thought about it. And also games as a medium, I think, are really interesting in letting you engage with questions which other formats wouldn't. You know, film is really good for some, dealing with some issues in this, you know, and serious issues as well, but it's a different kind of experience. And I was thinking about a game, something like the Stanley Parable. I don't know if you're familiar with the Stanley Parable, but you know, that is kind of amusing on choice and determinism and
Yeah.
cause and effect and stuff like that. And you know, I would call that a serious game, because it makes you think about how you know, determinism works and stuff like that, even though it might be more seen as a kind of more straight up entertainment game.
If we're speaking about the game 1111 Memories Retold, that this is a serious game or not?
I would. I mean, and it's kind of again on the surface of it, because it's about World War One and a big, you know, serious conflict, real world issue that was not that far in the part. And because we have real in the game, we have real historical objects that you can find and learn about. You know, there are collectibles in the game which are, you know, real historical things which you learn a bit more about. And if you didn't know anything about World War One, you'd certainly learn a lot more about it from playing the game. But again, also the story of the game is about, it's not about war, it's not about fighting, it's about people within war and kind of the effect that war has on people, you know, their relationships and how it affects them and stuff like that. So I think that's part of what makes it a more serious game, is that it is about learning something about, well, or trying to impart something about human nature or about people, or you know, something that is important for people to understand, I think. So yeah, I think it is in both its subject matter, but also in the kind of the story that we try to tell within it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, who made the decision to develop this game? Because I think sometimes a serious game is also defined by who is basically giving a decision. Like, for instance, when we're working with partners in international cooperation, they say, we want a serious game that educates and teaches people on this, and therefore you get this X amount of budget to do it, to realize it, and then afterwards measure the impact of it. In this mixture of serious game, entertainment game, it's perhaps not always that easy. The question is, what is the attention of the person that was doing the decision of doing 1111?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting story, actually. There was a few different sort of milestones on the road to it happening, I guess. I think the first thing that came about was a guy who used to work at Aardman, a guy called Jake Mannion, who I know that you are friends with and have worked with before. He ended up sitting next to Johan Fernese, who is the director of another World War I game called Valiant Hearts when he was at Ubisoft. And they ended up sitting next to each other at Games for Change conference. And got chatting, and Jake was a big fan of Valiant Hearts. Johan was a big fan of Aardman, and they started talking about, oh, look, we've got a big team of CG artists and things like that. And Johan was like, oh, I've got this other story that I kind of want to tell about World War I, and had the seeds of the idea of this already. So we then kind of started working on it at Aardman a little bit under the radar, because Aardman at the time it's not like we were really pushing to do this kind of game, and we were doing gaming but on a slightly smaller scale, but we were kind of worked on it a little bit under the radar. But then once we had like a nice pitch together, we then took it to a few publishers, and Bandai Namco, who is the publisher, ended up funding it. They were quite interested because they're a Japanese company, and they have really strong they had a really strong desire, and they have a really strong sort of moral compass about a lot of the games they make and have done successful are about big robots smashing each other up and things like that. But they want to be doing stuff which is a bit more serious as well, because of this the nature of the company. And so they were really, really behind it, and really trying to do something that was a bit more a bit more of a serious game, talking about a big issue. And obviously we launched the game on the centenary of the armistice, so 100 years after the end of the Second World War. With that coming up, it just seemed all these things kind of coalesced into the perfect time to do this.
I see.
So yeah, that was kind of it. It was like loads of little moments of serendipity along the road, I guess.
Wonderful. And what is also of interest for me is, like, what is then your intention, your motivation of doing this? Do you think that, okay, it just works out quite well, and there, as you mentioned, serendipity moments that one led to another? Or was it also, and you thought, okay, the story would sell nicely now? Or is it more on the moral compass that you mentioned, okay, we have to tell the story, people need to know about this?
Yeah. I mean, Bandai certainly never thought they were going to make money out of this. That was never there. They never thought this was going to be, huge selling thing and make loads of cash. That wasn't it. That was, as I said, they wanted to do it for a kind of social responsibility angle. Certainly, Johan's original story and part of the reason, we wanted to do this was kind of like a living heritage, I think, with what we were terming it at the time. But how do we do something that honors the fact that a lot of the dev team were European, and we found out through and one of the amazing things about doing this game is loads of the people on the team found out and engaged with the stories of their own relations in World War One. So the more that we kind of became invested in our family stories of people who had served or were affected by the war, that really kind of made it even more important for us to tell a story that seemed well, I mean, one thing we kept saying when we were developing is, like, we wanted to be, if we had showed this to a relative who was in the war, we would have been proud to show them it, rather than maybe necessarily showing something that was about, where some war games obviously go, which is focusing on the mechanical aspects of war, the guns and the shooting and whatever, which is, if you read people's diaries and stories from the time, that's not what the common soldier thought or cared about. They cared about getting home. They cared about the horrible conditions. They didn't care about, I want to go and shoot X amount of people in the head.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. You have had a specific target group in mind while designing the game?
I mean, we all kind of just wanted to play it for people who played interesting indie game titles, basically. People who wanted an experience which is a bit different from the kind of mainstream, most served video game thing. So really, that was the people we wanted to play. People who were more were interested in, an interesting story, an interesting art style, you know, something that wasn't necessarily what you would think about when you played a war game. So that was really it, and it was really about, you know, something that again, anyone who had any experience, any strong feelings about the war, or also maybe wanted to learn a bit more about it, you know, everyone could get different parts of it.
But you didn't plan for it to be implemented in any type of learning institution or something like this. No,
No, that
it
was
was.
never the plan. We wanted to have that layer. You know,
Mhm.
we wanted to. Obviously, it's all based on all the historical events in it are, you know, accurate. You know, take the timeline is correct, and as I say, you find these collectibles and real mementos and things from the war. So there is that historical
Yeah,
layer, but really it was about trying to tell this story and getting people to think about the story and how, you know, this personal account of war, and also the fact, you know, the game's kind of a little bit about the remembering of war rather than just
yeah,
being, you know, the fact that remembering is a subjective thing and people have different experiences about stuff. And we kind of try to do more to feed into that.
yeah.
But never, we were never trying to be like, we want this as something we want, you know, people will use this in schools to show their kids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Even though we have heard some anecdotal about stories about people doing that, it was more about the getting the story out there, basically.
Okay, if we can perhaps just stick to that. Do you have some stories that tell that this game was used in any type of other, I don't know, educational learning
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean,
scenario?
I've just anecdotally had you know, a few emails where people have said that they have used it as a tool in classes. Quite a
Ah,
few teachers and university lecturers, you know, are always looking for interesting ways to engage their students more. So some people have used clips from it. Some people have played the little parts of the game and talked about the message of it and stuff.
oh, wonderful.
So we've had a little bit, and then we were really lucky to also be the Imperial War Museum here in the UK did a exhibition called War Games recently, which was about the relationship between video games and war. And we were very lucky to be one of the games featured in that, in amongst all
Oh,
these other like random
congratulations.
titles. Yeah, it was really fantastic. We went down to the opening and worked with them on the exhibition, and you know, yeah, it was a really fantastic exhibition. I think it might even still be on at the moment. But if you're ever in London near the Imperial War Museum,
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend checking it out.
Wonderful, thanks. And I think we already spoke about like why you picked the setting of World War One, but I think within this selection, how did you do the analysis phase? Because you mentioned that you also had like different, you know, aspects from like real history and stuff like this. How did you collect the information that were needed in order to design this experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think, as I said, partly Johan had done a lot of research on in Valiant Hearts and had another story that he wanted to kind of tell and some ideas from it in that. But also, you know, kind of when we started doing it, we did consider whether World War One was still, you know, exactly the right thing. But it's just so less studied in kind of popular media than, you know, World War Two, obviously, because it's a bit easier and a bit more black and
Hmm.
white. So certainly World War One seemed like much more fertile soil for the story we were trying to tell. And then we as a team, you know, internally and with Johan's company, DigixArt, you know, we just did a lot of research. We went to the Imperial War Museum quite a lot and obviously saw the exhibitions and they have lots of research stuff that you can do there. Obviously read as much as we could, watched films, etc., and sort of got them the media landscape. But then we also, I think relatively early on, we had two sort of historical two for university professors who are both specialists in
Hmm.
World War One who attached. One from who was kind of more on the Central Powers side, and one who was kind of more on the Allies side, and like we kind of had the balance of both of them in their
Hmm.
specialist field, and they were absolutely fantastic in kind of. We could ask them any questions, and you know, because we were making all these, you know, you find images online that say they're from World War One, and they're not. They're just from some random, you
Yeah.
know, website where they've kind of misattributed it. So we had that layer from them. We could actually then use that to sort of pick through our research and kind of pick out the stuff that was real, and use that to inform the development of the story, the character design, everything really.
Okay, yeah, I think this is a very interesting approach of also, yeah, kind of having the two sides on board for the learning content, you know, that
Yeah.
it is not biased, that it's not, you know, from one
Yeah.
perspective, very interesting to see. Did you also, well, interviews is now tough with World War One. That is very rare to be able to do this still. Yeah, but okay, having those history professors on board was surely of added value. I see a question from Yannick. Please unmute yourself if that's still relevant.
I guess it's already answered a little bit, but it's just kind of funny to me that the studio that's known for Shaun the Sheep and Wallace and Gromit ends up making a World War One based game.
Yeah.
So maybe how did that came about?
Well, I think one of the main influences to getting it done and getting it signed. So we had actually made so obviously Aardman is most known for Shaun the Sheep, Wallace and the Gromit, stop motion feature films. You know, that is when you think of Aardman, what you do. But we've been doing, the company's been around 40 years, and, you know, we've done a fantastically large amount of other things, including, you know, advertising, short films that are not stop motion, games as well. You know, we've been making games for 15 years or so prior to 11/11 coming out on a smaller scale, but, you know, there's lots of different stuff. And we had made a film for the Imperial War Museum called Flight of the Stories, which was a really beautiful painterly style film that we made for them about stories kind of coming home about the wars to the Imperial War Museum. And Johan saw this after I think it was even after we'd started working on it, but saw this and was like, wow, that painterly style would be amazing for a game. And that's kind of what we pitched it as. And, you know, I think on the surface, it doesn't look like an Aardman thing because it's not the, you know, the big eyes and the stop motion thing. But I think if you sort of look a little bit below, you know, it's still supposed to be a handcrafted style because it's supposed to be like a living painting. And it still has, you know, when we describe ourselves as a studio, we described ourselves as a storytelling studio, you know, not a stop motion studio or anything like that. It's about storytelling and it's about great characters. And 11/11 has, you know, both those things. And that's really why, you know, it made sense for us to take it on still as a game, even though it's not the traditional kind of house style.
Yeah, and I think speaking about the art style, I mean, this is very, very outstanding and unique, I would say, in 11/11. And why and how did you pick this art style?
So partly, as I said, it was based on that film from the IWN, you know, that painterly style we thought was really, really beautiful. Bram Twim, who is the art director at Aardman on it, we actually did some more explorations at the beginning. We wanted to set it in something that felt right for the period, obviously, but then the kind of more from around the sort of turn of World War One starting, kind of more cubism was like the big prevalent, you know, or the new kind of art style happening at the moment. And we did some early tests of a kind of cubist style game, which was really interesting, but it looked a bit more like a kind of like an already seen style. It looked a bit like a low poly kind of video game aesthetic already. And it didn't quite tie up with the story that we wanted to tell as well. But then when we started looking at the Impressionist era, which is obviously a little bit earlier and a little bit more, you know, end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, rather than sort of temporally right on the wall, it just might have made much more sense with the story we wanted to tell, which was about this remembering of war and this slight obfuscation of detail and hazy, imperfect remembrance. And it was just something we hadn't seen so much in video games. There's been a few games that have done, like, you know, different versions of the style, and Dreams with the PS4, PS5 kind of creation engine, which always has this amazing painterly style as well, which came out afterwards. I think did a really good job. But yeah, it was just something that seemed to really fit with the story, with the era, and it was just something we were really, you know, passionate about being Aardman as well. It was for sure the most difficult part of the whole process for us, trying realizing that technically and getting it to work and getting it to actually look good and look like something that worked with everything. And, you know, there were some really cool features we had to drop towards the end of production, just for performance reasons, unfortunately. But yeah, it was something I'm really proud of what the team achieved with that, and what we managed to do.
And I think it perfectly supports what you just mentioned with these memory aspect, which is kind of blurry, you know, kind of, I don't know. It can be also like changing the perspective. It also changes the kind of how you perceive the game a little bit. And this also goes hand in hand, I think, with the soundtrack also supporting the story. Can you elaborate a little bit on the soundtrack, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the soundtrack is one of my favorite parts of the game for sure. That was incredible to be part of. So Johan, the director of Digix Art, it was an audio guy originally. That's kind of how he started off a game. So music and sound was always going to be a big part of this. But he knew another French composer, Olivier de Rivière, who's a fantastic composer, has done a lot of video games and other stuff. And I think they'd always wanted to work together. And we really wanted to have, again, something that really made sense with the game and sort of the ethos and everything. And Olivier came on board really, really early, like I think even in pre-production, and was getting involved with meetings and things from the start, because he is very passionate about, music and sound of a video game. You don't just add on, and again, you shouldn't just add on the end. They should all reinforce and be part of this telling of the story or telling of the mechanics of the game and everything. So he came on very, very early and was, picking into the why and the details behind everything, and worked extensively with the writers who he worked with as well to really make the soundtrack make sense with the story we were telling and really reinforce the experience.
Yeah.
And then having this amazing, we recorded with the London Philharmonia Orchestra at Abbey Road, having this amazing quality of score just gave it this extra level of quality basically to the game, I think. And it was really nice. We got to, so when they did the recording, we were very deep in making the game. Everything's very, very busy. We all got to listen into a live stream of it being recorded. So everyone just took it over the few days it was being recorded. All the team, we just had our headphones in as well, and we were listening to a live stream from Abbey Road with them recording the soundtrack. Nice. It was amazing.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's also the soundtrack is super powerful, especially when combination also with the art style. Which brings me then naturally to the next aspect of the game design. How did you decide on the game elements, the game mechanics, the core loops and stuff that you have in the game? Because they also seem to be kind of a natural fit to the art style, to the storytelling, to the sound. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that process.
Sure, yeah. I mean, from the very start, it was really, really important for the story and for the whole game that the people you were playing weren't combative soldiers, right? And you end up playing a photographer and an engineer. And really part of it grew out of that, what can we have these people doing in the war, which is, not going around shooting people. And so Johan and the team at Digix, and when we worked together on the ideas, came up with the ideas, the photography gameplay, which again is about capturing moments and sort of remembering them, stuff like that. And we really just wanted everything to be, this game was supposed to be accessible as well. This wasn't supposed to be a game that like hardcore gamers really wanted to play and like intensely get into. We wanted it to be, the game was about all these things making sense together, the mechanics and the story and everything. So we wanted them to be, interesting enough that you could sort of take you through the story and they made sense for what you were trying to do in the story at that time. And there's some really, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't played it, but there's some really moments where, something that you do early on in the game as an action that you take place really comes back later and really sort of beds you into the story. So really we just worked from that, like how can we make things that, make sense with the story and then that are accessible for people to, who may not be the most cognizant game players with like, even using dual sticks and stuff like that. We did a lot of work to make sure so you could play it with just pressing the single stick. You wouldn't have to worry about doing dual cameras and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because we wanted it to be accessible and really wanted, again, for it to all serve this kind of story and message that we were trying to tell with the game.
Okay, so also this is the level of difficulty that you chose, basically. The main reason was because like I would say also from a hardcore gamer point of view, it is not the hardest game to play to succeed. So you will not basically fall into do, fail, redo, learn. That's basically not the idea behind the game, but it seems to be really supporting the story and being accessible for.
Yeah, exactly that. We just wanted something that, even it might be someone picked it up who had not really played games before or anything like that. And we wanted them to still be able to progress through this story. We didn't want to, hold things back because you couldn't, you weren't that good at it. So yeah, that's why I think the mechanics were enough to kind of reinforce what was going on, but it wasn't supposed to be like a big challenge or anything going like that.
Very good. You already spoke about the two main characters. So we have a photographer and we have an engineer. And you already answered one of my questions that I had on my list, which was like, why did you select those two characters?
Yeah, as I said, it was about having non-combatant soldiers,
Yeah,
basically, you know, people who are there for other reasons.
yeah.
But also it was about, you know, having well, as I said, the photography gameplay kind of making sense with the memories and things, but also, you know, we wanted them to be there for another reason as well, because, you know, Harry is also, he's there to be a photographer, but he's also kind of gone to war to impress a girl, and he's kind of tied up in this big thing that he doesn't understand. And Kurt, you know, he's there as an engineer, but really he's there because his son's gone missing on the front and things like that. So really it was about finding what roles can we give these people within the war that makes them almost, I don't want to say innocents, because, you know, they're not innocents, they're still soldiers, but they weren't supposed to be, you know, directly contributing to the main
Yeah.
thesis or main force of what was going on in the war at the time.
And can you tell me about the cat and the bird that you have? Because like sooner or later, we're now also starting to spoiler a little bit of
Yeah.
the gameplay. So please, for those who want to, you know, play the game and experience everything, now it's the time to switch off. Goodbye. No, but now we're spoilering a little bit. There's also a cat and a bird appearing in the game. Can you tell us a little bit why?
Yeah, so that was really, I mean, that was in from the very beginning as well. I think the first ever concept piece of art we did was the character that we're going to be Kurt with the cat on his shoulders. And really, again, it was about having these innocents in the war who were kind of not really affected by it. Like the cat for the cat and for the pigeon, like they're not, you know, the war doesn't mean anything to them. They're just, you know, animals in there. And we wanted to have these an excuse to have kind of moments of levity within the story. So, you know, we wanted, obviously there's so much grim stuff happening as because it's going on in World War One, but we also wanted to be able to have these moments of kind of levity that let you have the light and the shade within the story, so it, you know, has a bit more light. But again, it's about having these characters that are a bit more just innocent of the war effort, and you know, to them it doesn't mean anything why there's these people running around with guns. They're just there because they are, you know, they're just existing within it.
Yeah.
And also it gave us a chance to do, you know, some really fun little things with cats jumping around and flying pigeons everywhere, you know, and you know, it is still a game. You got to have, you know, some of the more mechanically dexterous and fast-paced bits are there when you're playing with the cat and the pigeon.
I think it also you know, beautifully supported contrasts that we saw, you know, like the very grim stuff that you saw, but then you're playing as this innocent, I don't know, bird or cat and walking around, and which is of course a super important instrument, you know, in storytelling, the contrast there as well.
100%. I mean, we did even at one point, we even considered just making the game about the cat. Like at the end, I think at the end of pre-production, we're like, wow, everyone loves playing the cat. The cat bit's really fun. Should we just make a game about a cat? But I mean, and you know, Stray, the game that came out last year, or whatever it was, they did a very, very good job of that. I'd love to see Stray in World War One. I think it's still an idea that would work quite well.
Yeah, DLC, huh? Next year. So, okay, but yeah, we said we're spoilering a little bit. I'm also super interested on the decision on the different endings of the game, because we have different possibilities depending on the decisions that the player is doing. I think this only refers to the very end of the decisions the player is doing, right? How the end is going.
Well, kind of. So there are, there's either 24 or 32 ending permutations, basically. But there are kind of you're quite right in the last level, the last scene, basically. The main bulk of the ending that you get is based on your decisions within that. But then for every version, how your character thinks about it, positively or negatively, is impacted on all the decisions you've made through the game, basically.
Okay.
So you can get one end, like depending on how you've played the game up to then, if you do that last scene exactly the same with two different run-ups to it, you can get one ending and the character will actually feel, you know, have had kind of a positive arc, and what happens will kind of be a positive for them, or it can be more negative for them as well, basically. So it's two variations of the sort of, I think, 16 possible endings or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah, and that was really interesting as well, trying to make those all make sense. And, you know, how can we have the decisions you made up till then have the characters feel differently about them as well, and also differently about what they've kind of remembered, you know, how you've kind of told the story, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was,
And,
I don't want to.
yeah, I think also Yannick and me, we had kind of the same ending
Oh
while
yeah.
playing the game, and both were not very positive. And
Yeah, but
for
it is
me,
kind of,
uh,
that's the thing as well. I think
it,
if you take the, oh sorry.
no, sorry. The question here is what is, I think it's super interesting, and because it is such an important statement, you know, the last scene that you have in the game, this is the scene that also makes you think for a longer period of time. And you mentioned that you would identify or would define 1111 Memories Retold as a serious game, and then specifically the ending of it, you know, is to what sticks to the player's head for a long time, and people reflect on their conceptions and perspective. So did you do this on purpose, that that there can be also very grim endings, I would say?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, we had to be realistic about what the war has meant, and like what, you know, the things you've played up to then, you're not going to feel great about what's happened. It's not going to be like a super positive thing. So yeah, we thought it was really important for the story that those things could be grim, and you know, and some of them are really grim. I don't know which versions you got, but there are some that are really like dark for both the characters. But then there are some which are, you know, do have the lightness and everything, and we just wanted to. I think all the messages that kind of came out in the endings made sense with the decisions people have made, and they don't. What we really didn't want to do was cheapen the experience by suddenly giving you a super happy ending that didn't quite
Yeah,
make sense
yeah,
with
yeah,
what had gone on up till then.
yeah.
Yeah, and I
And
think, you know, some of the more powerful things it can be when it leaves you with something that makes you think about, you know, think about the nature of the story we were telling, which, as we said, you know, in the nature of serious games, was about a real event, not a nice event. You
yeah,
know, so
yeah.
something we
No,
wanted people to go away with is that feeling.
and here a question also on, I think it's a game design question or storytelling question. Um, like quite often when you have like different endings of a game, no matter if it's cyberpunk or whatever, you as the player, you're quite in control in which direction it will go.
Mm-hmm.
You, while you're doing the decision, you know what kind of ending you can expect
Mm-hmm.
after that decision. And I felt this was not the case with 1111 Memories Retold. So I tried to survive kind of, but I just couldn't, you know,
Yeah.
in this way. So that was super interesting. So I didn't say you should. So I was not feeling in control of the ending. And
Yeah.
is this a decision that you made on purpose?
Yeah, I think the endings, I mean, and I don't want to talk about, because even positive and negative is kind of wrong in the terms of what the endings are. But we wanted you to I don't, again, I don't want to say be rewarded for making decisions, but like I think the very worst thing that you can get in that is if you choose to do nothing. Like if you have absolute choice paralysis and you don't choose what seems like the more difficult or the more easy option. If you do, because you can choose to do nothing in all those sort of events at the end.
Yeah.
And then I think you get the worst thing. So really we wanted people to just be making decisions for these characters, and really therefore, you know, they've thought about everything that up till now, and what does it mean for you as a player when you're in this moment. And if you do that, then you get the more interesting endings, I think, or the ones where there are more like developed character arcs for the players.
Yeah.
And as I say, yeah, it was very much a conscious decision that if you just choose to do nothing, then it doesn't go very, I mean, it goes even worse than it possibly does another way.
Yeah, and I think Yannick is also adding here a very interesting aspect. A big part there is the language barrier between Kurt and Harry and Barrett. So language, huh? Communication. I think this also you are beautifully highlighting how important language is. Perhaps can you elaborate on this a bit?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there were some interesting things with that in the game because, as I said before, you know, it's a little bit both these. The narration is a retelling of the story. It's not, you know, this is happening to me right now. It's a retelling. But as you said, the main thrust of the story is these two two guys from opposite sides of the war, kind of getting stuck together and forming an unlikely friendship across their communication barrier. But also, we have everyone in the story speaks in their, in their natural language. Like the Germans speak German, the French people speak French, the English people speak English, etc., etc. We really wanted to have, and they have subtitles translation, but the voiceover is just in that language. And we really wanted to have that again for, to give a bit more of the realism of what it'd be like to be thrown into this European melting pot where you don't necessarily speak the language, and what does that mean for you?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean Harry and Kurt's relationship and kind of what happens in Act 3 of the story, and is in some ways driven by the fact that they don't understand each other and they don't speak the same language, and they can't, in the heat of the moment, explain why stuff has happened. So yeah, I don't think communication was never like a pillar of the story, but it was definitely something that kind of permeated it on all the levels, I think.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think speaking about also the language or voices, you have Elijah Wood as Harry.
Yeah.
How did it come?
Yeah, it was really great. So we had Elijah Wood as Harry and Sebastian Koch as Kurt, and I think he's been in a few. I think he's maybe more well known in Germany, but he's been in a few big, Hollywood films. Well, we were very lucky in that we kind of made a list of all the people we'd like to play these characters, and we went out and started speaking to agent, and a few of our very top picks said yes, which was absolutely fantastic. Like, I think it's quite one of the good things about the Aardman name, even if you're not doing something Aardman-y, is it's relatively well known. Elijah Wood as well is, I think he owns a VR company and had done some gaming stuff before and is definitely a gamer. And Sebastian was just quite interested and got really involved with the story for him. And he was, both of their performances were phenomenal in the role. And again, we got to, listen into the voiceover sessions when they were recording them for the first time and just hear what, the caliber of action we got. Because, we had like an hour with them at the beginning to sort of go over the story and everything, and they'd read all the scripts and everything and just launch into it. And yeah, what they brought to the game with those performances, I think made it really, really work, make those characters really work.
Definitely, yeah, it's a very good fit for both of them. So yeah, wonderful. Regarding impact, if we're speaking about serious games, we also love to speak about impact. Do you know like any type of quantitative or qualitative impact that you were able to achieve with this game? Any type of, qualitative stories? You already mentioned that some of your some teachers used it in school, but also like on a quantitative basis, anything that proves the success of this game?
Quantitative, not really, I'm afraid. It's nothing we as I said, we weren't trying to make an educational game, so it wasn't like we went out with a hypothesis or with tests that we knew we were going to run afterwards or anything like that. And it wasn't something we were really like, that wasn't the important thing for us in making the game. As I say, we've had, anecdotal evidence from random emails and speaking to people at conferences and stuff like that. And also, actually, one of the best things is just reading reviews, reading people, journalist reviews or Steam reviews, etc. People, how they engaged with it and what they thought about it. And that was kind of the most sort of powerful aspect for me. And also, as I say, within the team, like, just finding out all more about our own personal heritage with World War One and with the events of it, I think was really strong. But yeah, actually, I'd like, I mean, if anyone's done a study out there and has any data they'd like to share with us, then that'd be amazing. But yeah, I don't know.
You heard that, right? So please. Wonderful. And can you also, I'm not sure if you're allowed to speak about this transparently, but can you tell us a little bit how much time and budget did you have to develop this game? How many people were involved? A little bit of the development process would be very interesting.
Budget, I can't really talk about. But I think from when we very started pre-production, with a team of maybe 3 or 4, I think at the time. So only like 3 of us at Aardman and maybe a few people at DigixArt, the company. That went up to a team of, I think, about probably 25 to 30 people was when we were at the full burn in production. And so we had I think that the entire life cycle was probably about a year, just under a year and a half, I think, to make the game. The actual pre-production was about 8-9 months, and then the production itself was again in about 8-9 months. So the actual it was actually, you know,
Very
getting
quick,
it
yeah.
out for the armistice, which is obviously very important, was scary. And
Yeah.
I'm amazed at the work the team managed to do. In the amount, just the amount of stuff in there, you know, the length of the game, the amount of animation, the amount of story and everything in there in the time that we had, I think was a real triumph for the team.
Yeah. Great
Um,
team, it seems, huh?
yeah, it was really good, and it was amazing working, you know, between, you know, we had a team at Aardman in the UK working on it. We had a team in France, Johan's company DigixArt. But then we'd also had, because our animation director Wilfried, who is another ex Ubisoft guy, actually was living in Singapore. We ended up having an animation team out in Singapore. So we had all these teams across the globe, and actually we had an audio team in Canada as well. So it was very much kind of global effort to
Mm.
get this done.
How do you bring those people all together? You know, like if you have these remote teams working, all together on one product and coming with different backgrounds, different, you know, ethnic groups, perhaps
Yeah.
even. And how do you bring all of this together?
Yeah, it was tricky, and it was certainly, you know, this is obviously pre-COVID and pre-remote working being quite as well thought out and supported as it is now. But we did, I mean, little thing. Obviously, we know we had Slack and we were talking all the time on instant messaging and stuff like that. But we had a quite a nice thing where we just had between the three studios, we had, I think it was even Skype back in those days. But we had a laptop set up which had a camera just always on. Whenever the first person came in the studio, you turn it on, and so you could just see all the studios all the
Oh,
time. Even like, you know, there was no audio or anything. We couldn't like we weren't talking through it, but you just see the other studio, and you know we'd finish at like, you know, 5 p.m., 5:30, 6 p.m., and that's when the Singapore guys would be coming online, and I know we'd wave hello to them on the camera, and the team in France, you know, that even just that as a little window to feel connected
I
really
see.
really helped, I think. And then when we could, we'd meet up in person. Like we went into one of the at the end of pre-production, I think we went to Puy de Fou, which is like a historical recreation, kind of theme. I think theme parks are wrong word, but kind of
Hmm.
place in France. And we took as many of the team there as possible to really sort of finalize the story, talk about the game, and everything. And that was just trying to get those face-to-face meets in when we could. Really helped as well, and kind of solidifying the relationships.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. Yeah, it's super important, I think, yeah, to have this common goal, this project culture there as well. What are some lessons learned from the game for you?
I mean, there were many we learned a lot about, because this was our first console game, kind of in-house at Aardman. And so we learned, you know, it was a bit of a baptism of fire in some ways, and making something that was quite large in quite a small period of time. But we learned a lot about video game production in that time, and also about kind of how it is different to, you know, we do obviously big feature films and stuff like that, and learn how both the similarities and the differences a lot more between the two. I think the thing, as I said, I've mentioned it a few times, but was the thing we learned a lot about was our personal histories of war and what the team felt about war. And we had in the credits of the game, everyone had, you know, the names of the family members who served or were affected by World War One and things. So one of the things I learned about it was about my family history with World War One, and
Hmm.
my my great grandfather's honorable discharge papers are a collectible that you can find in the
Oh,
game.
really?
It's amazing, yeah. Just how I found out that my father had them, and so that when we were looking at the collectibles, showed them to the historical consultants and got them in there. So from, you know, there's kind of both the practical learnings. There was the kind of the sort of war. I mean, the historical learnings, I guess. But also just I think it was really amazing for Aardman to do this at the time, because it really kind of cemented us and cemented within the company. You know, within my team in the games team, we really wanted to make games like this for quite a while.
Yeah.
But they kind of showed the company that it was an amazing way to tell stories a bit more, because I think still some of the you know, the higher powers of the company saw games as, you know, the not the amazing storytelling device that they are. And it kind of opened the company's eyes a bit more to video games as a method for storytelling, which is what we do. So that's what we've been working on since then, basically, is kind of building more games and a games team at Aardman. And so that's one of the big things that's come out from us for Aardman is, video games is going to be a big part of our future more than it already has been.
Nice. And do you have any further plans with the game for in the future with this game, or do you planning to do a number 2 for World War II or something like that?
There's nothing at the moment. I mean, I would love to, because as I said, the art style, I think we got to like 70-75% of what we wanted, what we were kind of planning it to be. And as I say, we had to drop a few features from it towards the end because of performance. But I would love to go back and do something more with that art style. And then as for actual that game itself, unfortunately, no more plans at the moment. We have a new game that we're working on right now at Aardman, and we've got some other very interesting things in development, none of which I can talk about, unfortunately. But yeah, there's going to be some very cool stuff, I think, that came out of doing this game, working with Johan's company and kind of taking Aardman forward into gaming.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, George. That was really insightful, and a super nice game, I think. Yeah, I played it through. I think there were so many unique elements, and I was also discussing and speaking with a lot of my friends about the game and how you basically convey the messages of this. I think this is such a powerful, nice vehicle that you developed, that you created. So thank you for this.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's nice to hear. As I say, it was just nice to think about it and talk about it again after quite a while. So yeah, thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, Yannick, do you have something that you also want to ask George? Anything?
Maybe one thing that the players of a game often wonder about is what could have been with a game. You say you had quite a tight schedule. So is there any like major content or features that you had to cut that you really would have liked to implement, but that just couldn't make it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, yeah, so there were some levels that got cut, which we ended up having to snip a bit of this. Stories in video games are hard, because once you've got a story, it's very hard to remove parts of that story and it still work. But video games are very hard to make, as I'm sure everyone knows. And there's always a time when you realize we can't do everything we wanted to do here. So we moved a couple of levels. Some of actually one of them, which was probably my favorite level in a gameplay terms, but it just didn't serve the story. And when you got down to the brass tacks of, we haven't got enough time, what do we cut? You have to make these brutal choices. So a couple of levels are cut. We had some really nice features in the art style. As I said, one of the big ones that got removed was impasto. Impasto is sort of the depth that oil paint has on the canvas. So not just would you have the brush strokes, but you also have how the light hits the paint strokes. And that was something we worked on quite a lot towards the end, which was starting to look really, really good to give it that even more of the oil painted feeling. But unfortunately, for performance reasons, we just couldn't get it to run on a PlayStation 4 or on an Xbox at 30 frames a second. So unfortunately, that was one of the big things I'm still sad about that got cut.
And what is the level? Your favorite level?
It was towards the end. Like, as I said, it wasn't that important for the story. But it had some really good little like gameplay of avoiding a sniper and like doing some stuff with like gas puzzles and stuff. And it was probably the most gameplay heavy level, I'd say. And yeah, it was cut, unfortunately.
Thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for this beautiful game. And we stay tuned for to seeing like what else is in the pipeline. So you cannot speak about this, but I'm super curious on reading about it. So thank you so much for being with us today.
No worries. Well, yeah, very nice to meet you both, and thank you very much for having me on.